You may have seen this video by Tech Ingredients, where they build speakers by putting a surface transducer on a styrofoam sheet. And I've played around with this some in the past. And what I think sounds really great about this is that these speakers have a way of filling a room with sound without necessarily needing to be loud. By contrast, regular speakers feel a little bit like trying to illuminate a room with a laser beam, whereas these flat panels just seem to kind of glow. And if you think about the inverse of that, that might actually be a really nice property for a microphone, like the ability to capture a whole space fairly evenly and without being too dependent on proximity. And since a contact mic is basically the inverse of a surface transducer, today I want to put a contact mic on a piece of styrofoam to see what happens. And so this is the styrofoam, and the recommendation is to round the corners off and to sand down the shine on the surface. And then I have these cotter pins, which I'm going to use to hang this. And so I can just put a little bit of epoxy in there to hold these in place. And then I marked out a point that's 2/5 of the way from either side of the panel. And I put a little dot there. And at this point, I guess if you were making speakers, you would stick the surface transducer to that point. But of course, I'm not making speakers, I'm making a microphone. And I guess normally you can think of a surface transducer as being like a small speaker that turns into a large speaker when you stick it to the styrofoam. And I guess in a certain sense, the surface transducer is already a microphone in the sense that if it vibrates, it will produce voltage at its output pins. So for now, I guess I'm just going to use some double-sided tape to temporarily stick this maybe a little bit off to the side of my dot, just so I can test it out as a microphone. And then of course, right on my dot, I'm going to stick a Metal Marshmallow Pro contact microphone. And then I'll hang this from my table here, and I'll connect both the contact mic and the surface transducer into the inputs of my audio interface. Okay, so now I'm gonna sit here next to this thing and talk a little bit. And just for the sake of comparison, right now you're listening through my camera's microphone. It's a Rode Video Micro. And so this is the sound through the surface transducer. And the signal level is really low, which is why it sounds so noisy. And so what you're hearing, I've normalized in post, but I haven't applied any other processing to it. And then this is the sound through the Metal Marshmallow Pro contact mic. And so the signal level is much higher and it's much less noisy. And again, I've normalized it in post to 0 decibels, and I haven't done anything else to it. So the contact mic clearly has a much better signal to noise ratio than the surface transducer, but to me it still doesn't sound great. To me it sounds a bit ringy, like it sounds very resonant, like there are some resonant peaks. So that's one of them right there. Yeah, so you can really hear the sound getting louder and quieter as I go down through the pitches there. And I can get kind of a poor man's impulse response by just tapping on the panel. And yeah, that's very ringy. It sounds like a bell. Dong, dong. And if you know anything about signal processing, you might know that if the frequency response is supposed to be flat, then the impulse response should be a click. It should be very short. And the fact that this continues ringing for some time tells you immediately that the frequency response couldn't possibly be flat. And so just to get a little bit more scientific about this, I'm going to do an experiment which I've done many times on this channel. So this time I'm going to use the surface transducer as a speaker. So I'm no longer using it as a microphone. And I'm going to play white noise out of the surface transducer, and I'm going to record it with my contact mic. And then I'll plot this spectrum. And this is what that looks like. So this is essentially the frequency response of the styrofoam. And indeed, just as I suspected, there are several strong peaks right in the middle of my vocal range. In fact, this peak right here corresponds exactly to the note that I was singing before. So this peak is why that note sounded so much louder than the other notes. And these peaks in general is just why this didn't sound so good as a microphone. And in retrospect, I see that Tech Ingredients did notice this and talk about it in some of their videos. But clearly this has to be damped. So to start with, I just damped it with my hands and repeated the experiment. And so this is what that looks like. I'm looking at the new blue line here, and that actually looks a lot better. Those peaks aren't nearly as strong as they were before, and overall the amplitude isn't any lower. This isn't any less sensitive than it was before. And just to go a step further, I took this whole thing down and just set it on the carpet and use the carpet to dampen it. And I repeated the experiment again, and this is what that looks like. And here it is by itself. And this actually looks pretty good. Those peaks are totally gone. Okay, and again, just for the sake of comparison, this is what it sounds like when it's hanging here. And this is what it sounds like sitting on the carpet. So yeah, that definitely sounds a lot better sitting on the carpet. I don't really hear that ringing sound anymore. But it still doesn't sound great. It sounds a little muffled to my ear, like it's not very crisp sounding. And if we look at this plot again, we can see why. It's because all frequencies greater than about 7,000 hertz have been pretty strongly attenuated. It's like some sort of low-pass filter. And 7,000 hertz is kind of right in the middle of the range where you hear all of these plosives and fricatives and sibilant sounds in speech. And so that's why it doesn't sound very crisp, because those are getting filtered out. And I tried many different placements of both the microphone and the transducer. And at some point I even just cut a big chunk off of this styrofoam panel. And I didn't really get any different results by doing any of that. And so I think it really is just this styrofoam itself, the material, is absorbing these frequencies above 7,000 hertz. And so the only way around that would be to possibly use a different material that doesn't have this property. But for now, I think I'm just going to have to be satisfied with this, and I'll leave that as future work to find a better material. And it's a bit interesting that when Tech Ingredients tested a bunch of materials, their plots don't even go up to 7,000 hertz. So you can't really tell just by looking at what they've done. So anyway, there are a couple more experiments that I wanted to try. First of all, I just wanted to know how much the foam is amplifying the sound. So I got a second mic and I just kind of dangled it there next to the first mic, and it's not touching the foam at all. And I've got the same gain and the same input settings on both of these mics, and I'm not going to normalize either one in post. And so you'll hear me talking first through the mic that's just dangling there, and that's probably going to be really quiet. And then you'll hear me talking through the mic that's on the foam. So this is the sound of the mic that's just dangling there. And then of course this is the sound of the microphone that is stuck to the foam. So yeah, from that it seems like the mic that's on the foam is about 35 decibels louder than the one that's just dangling there. So that's about how much the foam is amplifying the sound by. And then just for the sake of comparison, I am going to normalize the sound that I recorded through that dangling mic. And this is what that sounds like. So this is the sound of the mic that's just dangling there. And of course the signal to noise ratio there isn't very good. It's actually quite noisy. But if you can ignore the noise for a second, it actually sounds quite good. Like I don't hear that ringing sound and I don't hear that low pass filter sound. So that kind of shows that those sounds really are coming from the foam and not from the microphone. And then the other thing I wanted to do is just see what this sounds like in stereo. So I made two of these panels and I put them kind of on opposite sides of my room, and then I sat in between them. And yeah, so that does have a kind of spatial stereo effect to it. but it doesn't sound as strongly dependent on proximity as like cardioid microphones might. So I think these microphones do what I said in the beginning. They do fairly evenly capture the space. It's just that this particular material doesn't record high frequencies very well. But I think that you could use something like this to capture low or mid-frequency sounds kind of further out in a room. And that might actually work really well kind of in conjunction with other microphones. And so here's a little bit of djembe I recorded with these flat panel microphones. And then here's the same thing as recorded through my camera's microphone. And then here's a blend of the flat panels and the camera mic. So to me, that blended recording sounds a lot better than either of the individual recordings. It's somehow more balanced, like it has more high frequencies and more low frequencies than either of the individual recordings do. So I do think these flat panel microphones could have some nice applications. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that for now. So thanks for watching, and as usual, please remember to like and subscribe and all that kind of crap, and buy some microphones from me maybe. And I hope everybody's enjoying their beautiful summer. So yeah, that's it. I guess I'll see you next time. Bye!